On behalf of Nandini Chemical Journal, I have a pleasure in extending a hearty welcome. I am N.S. Venkatraman, Chief Editor, Nandini Chemical Journal, also Director of Nandini Consultancy Center, Chennai. In the last several months, particularly during the year 2021, there have been huge concern all over the world about the skyrocketing price of commodities, chemicals, and all kinds of products, including construction material, fuel, everything. There is concern as to what it will lead to. Is this price going to be sustained for a long time to come, or is it a short-term phenomena? That is what people have been wondering. The price of crude oil now has shot up to $85 per barrel. Price of coal in the international market is now ruling at around $235 per ton. The price of natural gas in the US is now touched a figure as high as $5.5 per MBTU. Recently, Government of India has raised the price of natural gas by 65%. As the energy sources price have got shot up at such a high level, the price of metals such as aluminum, copper, zinc, steel, and all have touched the roof. The bulk chemicals, commodity chemicals, ore such as caustic soda, sulfur, soda ash, or petrochemical, all prices have gone up. Obviously, there is a concern what is going to happen, and people are all discussing all over the world as to whether this is going to be a short-term phenomena or long-term phenomena. There is also some sort of a difference of opinion as to what are the factors that have contributed to such steep price increase. Considering this scenario, Nandini Chemical Journal, which is a monthly journal published in soft copy from Chennai, decided to organize a quick study on the various aspects of the price behavior in the global market in recent months. A study was conducted under the leadership of Mr. Swaminathan, Director, Nandini Consultancy, Singapore, and we are submitting the findings of the study today before you. Now, what is the reason and what are the price drivers? There are certain general basic factors. For example, we all know that when demand exceeds supply, price will go up. When there is a supply constraint and supply is not able to meet the demand, there is inevitable consequences is a rise in the price. In such situation, producers, middlemen, trading houses, distributors, everyone raise the price of the commodities and chemicals and multiply their profit. This is the general pattern that we have been saying. You all know this. Second factor which you also know is when such steep price takes place, it never takes place due to one factor. It takes place due to multiple factors. And the fact is, these multiple factors are often interdependent. For example, the feedstock for one industry is the finished product for another industry. The finished product for one industry is the feedstock for another industry. So when the feedstock prices go up due to any reason, or the raw material for making the feedstock price go up any reason, there is a cyclic effect. Then the all-round picture takes place. So no one can say this particular factor has contributed to the price increase. It is a multiple factors. There is also one more factor that is considering the price rise. In recent times, there have been a huge interest in buying green products and in denying the purchase of products which are not eco-friendly, which are not safe, and where the process employed is not eco-friendly or as per the green norm. Because of the reason, a number of products have gone out of the market, or at least the demand has come down substantially. When it has happened, they have to be replaced by new products which are eco-friendly. This is happening at a fast pace. Number of biotech routes have been developed in recent time, which replace the synthetic chemicals. For example, succinic acid is one classic example. In this particular scenario, when the product goes out of the market because consumers do not want it because of the lack of eco-friendliness, and it is replaced by some other product which is more eco-friendly, the technology is very secretive but confidential, then you find a situation, the new product with emerging technology are not adequately available, and the new product with emerging technology become much more expensive. These are all the general factors that contribute to price drivers, about which all of us have a fairly reasonable idea. Now, given this scenario, present scenario of the steep varying prices right now in the global market, what could be the basic factors? We have identified three factors that are really driving the price in the recent time. One is the COVID scenario. Second is the reluctance of the OPEC countries to increase the production of crude oil in tune with the present demand. Third is the China factor. Now let us take each one of the factors and quickly analyze what is happening. In the case of COVID, when COVID happened, the world was caught unaware. First, when it happened in Wuhan in China, many of us thought it is going to be a local phenomena, world will remain unaffected, and world was only observing China, not knowing that it is going to affect them too. Slowly, the COVID spread all over the world. In India too, earlier we were under the impression that it is not going to affect us, but it also hit us in a very hard. When this COVID happened in this particular way, the world did not know how to react. Medical professionals did not have an idea. Medical researchers did not have a clue. Then all kinds of prescriptions were done, like some traditional medicines or some drugs. US President Trump went to the extent of recommending some drug without knowing what it is. This is the kind of scenario that takes place. Fortunately, slowly, vaccines were developed and vaccines were introduced. Meanwhile, not knowing how to tackle the situation, it was decided that it is a contagious disease. So people were asked, don't touch anybody, don't touch any material, stay at home. Inevitably, factories were closed down, offices were closed down, services were closed down, entire world came to a situation of lockdown. When this happened, automatically what happened? There was no activity, therefore demand came down very steeply. In that period of COVID, not only demand came down, because many factories were also shut, supply also came down. But when the demand came down in the COVID period, supply came down in the COVID period, there was no impact on price because the situation was equalizing itself. After some time, when the COVID world reasonably became confident that COVID can be handled, vaccines were developed, mass vaccination program was started, and finally, when the COVID intensity was gradually coming down, the world realized, people realized, industries realized, governments realized that the world was to live with COVID. There's no point in going for a lockdown because of the COVID. For example, in India, earlier smallpox was a very big problem. When smallpox was widely prevalent in India, we did not close down the industry or we did not close down the country. We learned to live with smallpox. This is the same scenario. Some of the governments have officially announced that they will live with the COVID and tackle it as it comes. This is the mindset today. When this has happened, lockdown was gradually lifted. Suddenly demand picked up. It's inevitable. People started coming out. Companies started producing goods and commodities, services. Demand started happening. Consumer demand happened. It always happens. When the market opens up, first it is the consumer market that opens first. And when the consumer market opens up, supply market follows that and gives the supply. Here, what has happened when the lifting of the lockdown was gradually but quickly have been resumed, then you find a situation when the demand has gone up substantially high. When the demand has gone up substantially high, supply could not meet the demand. But it's again inevitable because suppose, I will give you a very, very, very simple example. When the lockdown was lifted, people started moving out. The demand for cosmetic products go up. For example, cosmetic product, I will take a case study of face powder. Obviously, demand for face powders would have gone up. Then for making the face powder, it requires a lot of chemical like calcium carbonate. Whereas the demand for the face powder has gone up because of the consumer market picking up. Calcium carbonate cannot be stepped up production overnight by the companies and factories because they are very many closed. So that's a price pressure for calcium carbonate. This has happened in every one of the area. This is one reason today where the supply is not able to meet the demand and supply is going to correct itself in the COVID time. That is what they hope. Second thing, what happened was during the COVID period, many people were left out of jobs. Companies, poor people were starving, and government cannot keep idle or keep watching the situation. Government has to come to the rescue. So what had happened was the government started giving freebies. It started supplying free rations. This is not only in India. So many other countries in different form it has been done. The government was spending huge money. Particularly in India, when vaccination was found to be the ultimate method of dealing with the COVID, and state government did not have the money to buy the vaccine, central government offered that they will buy the entire vaccine and supply it free to the state government. So central government need money. So huge outflow of funds happened for the government. But when the fund outflow happened for the government, what happens? Government has two options, which I don't have, you don't have. Government can print currency. Government is printing currency in India, as in several other places, including US. But then there's a limit beyond which it cannot be done. So what is the next option? Next option is increase the taxes. But again, the COVID scenario, people have taken such a beating, people have no capability to pay taxes. Then what is the soft option for the government? Touch your hand on petrol and diesel, increase the price of petrol and diesel, increase the taxes on petrol and diesel. That is what is happening in India. Similar policies are being adopted all over the world. So one of the Indian ministers have recently said, don't complain about the price of diesel and price of petrol touching 100 rupees, 110 rupees more. It is inevitable. This money is used by the government to pay for the welfare schemes it has introduced during the COVID period. There's a lot of logic in this kind of things. And third thing that happened during the COVID period was, during the COVID period, a lot of small-scale industries, which is really the backbone of the industries in India, and even the small and medium-scale sectors in other parts of the world, they could not take the shock of the COVID-19. The companies went into deep losses. And when the operation was resumed, the small-scale units particularly have not been in a position to restart the operation. Some of them have gone down to a permanent closure. The government could not do it because government is short of funds. They cannot do beyond a level. Now, what these small-scale units want is not loan. With loan, they cannot repay in the situation. They want grant. The government does not have the money to grant. Several units closed down. So what happened was the production capacity itself has come down. This is the scenario impact of the COVID-19 is cumulatively caused the price rise. That is one factor. Second factor is, when COVID-19 was brought under near control, lockdown was lifted, the immediate impact was demand for energy source increased phenomenally. Demand for oil went up, demand for natural gas went up, demand for coal went up. As you know, the crude oil production is largely controlled by OPEC and Russia, apart from USA to a considerable extent. During the COVID period, countries like USA, Saudi Arabia, and other oil-rich countries, which predominantly depended upon the oil money for the economy to be sustained, they all lost a lot of money. They want to make up. Now, when the demand has increased, they are not increasing their production. Now, Russia is producing somewhere around 9.5 to 10 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia is doing almost a similar figure. They are not increasing their production because they want to make hay when the sun shines. They want to get the money. So this is the scenario. When the demand for crude oil has gone up, automatically implies they will increase the supply and make the profit out of it. But they want to make too much of profit to compensate. Normally, in such situations, when the OPEC countries curtail the production, we expect USA to respond because USA has got huge capacity for production of shale oil and shale gas. But what happened in USA was, in January 2021, there was a huge cold wave. Your Gulf Coast was tremendously affected. Many companies in US production centers had been closed down. Shale oil gas production came down. Again, in August 2021, there's an Ida hurricane also took place. Again, it caused a big setback for shale oil production, gas production, and US number of units was also closed down. Petrochemical units closed down. Because of this situation, US will not be able to pump oil into international markets, though there's a shortage. The question here, right, is to what extent the Middle East countries, OPEC countries, will hold on to the price increase that we will see a bit later. Next factor, important factor, is the China factor. Today, as we all know, when China sneezes, world shivers. That's the ground reality, whether one likes it or not. China's capacity for all the products have increased phenomenally. Most of the products, China is the dominant producer and supplier in the international market. And chemicals and APIs for several countries, including India. That is the predominant position China has. How did China reach this dominant position? It is very simple. China simply dumped the goods and services in the international market during the last 2 decades. maybe at least some 5 years earlier. Now, when China dumped the goods like this, the other companies in the world could not meet it. Many of them closed down. I'll give you an example of citric acid. There are nearly 90 companies in China who are producing citric acid. It is made from starch. And citric acid was dumped from China at low price in the international market. Several companies in the US, Europe, who are producing citric acid, they all closed down because they could not meet the price war with China. There was one unit in India, Gujarat, who are producing around 25,000 tons of citric acid per year. That company also closed down. Today, China supplies around 85% of the world requirement of citric acid is supplied from China. This is the reason. This is how it has been done. Further, there are a number of instances which can be readily pointed out where China has given hidden tax support to the local industries. They're able to compete in the international market. In this particular scenario, China has become the dominant supplier in the world market today. And now, having done this, how China did? China did this by setting up projects at a low cost, that is, ignoring the environmental compulsions, not observing the safety regulations, and doing the project at a very low cost. Suppose a $1 per capacity that is be created in China costs around $1,000, same capacity in US or Europe or developed countries costs around $3,000 or $4,000 because they are spending money in the environmental issues. China doesn't do. They are spending money in safety precautions. China doesn't do. See, number of lives that have been lost in China due to coal mine disaster is more than the number of lives that have been lost all over the world during the last several years. That is a poor country. Because of these conditions, what has happened? China is now polluting itself. China can dump the goods in the international market. It cannot dump the pollution in the international market. China, what has happened? There are a number of rivers. There's a Yellow River, there's the Kaige River. Both these rivers and a few more rivers, their water quality is so poor that it does not even, it's worse than the standard 5 quality standards of the water. There are a number of places in China and rivers and lakes where due to eutrophication and soil pollution, conditions are very bad. More than half the cities in China have very poor air quality standards. China has realized this. China has now feel that it cannot do this anymore because it is polluting itself, not other part of the world. It is hurting itself. So China has decided to apply the changes. And in tune with the international thing, China has given with the promise that by 2060, it will have zero emissions. Whether it is going to achieve, I don't know. Now they have a very, very, very strict environmental standards. I'll give you a case example. In the case of titanium dioxide, the world installed capacity for titanium dioxide is now 9 million tons per annum. And China's capacity for titanium dioxide is 3.9 million tons per annum, nearly 40% of this. And there are nearly 100 titanium dioxide plants in China. Most of them are operating using sulfate process. Sulfate process is a very polluting process. World is gradually giving up the sulfate process routes because it's a ferrous sulfate, free sulfuric acid and all that, and replaced by more eco-friendly chloride process. Now, what China has done here is they have suddenly decided all the sulfate route TiO2 plants will close down. They will close down unless they attain very strict environmental standards given by China. So what is happening was more than 40 to 42 sulfate route TiO2 plants have small uneconomic capacities. They are all closed down right now. But China doesn't mind it because they got such overcapacity in so many industries. Even 20-25% of these industries are going to close down. China would not mind. More than that, what they have done is they are forcing the companies to shift their location. Up to May 2021, 1,196 companies have shifted the plants to other chemical parks from existing units. Then it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of time. It lost loss of production. And China is paying the price for it. It doesn't mind it because it is undergoing some sort of a structural changing situation. So the one reason what it is said is number of power plants are closed down in China. There is a huge power cut. That is what we say. Then China put extremely strict emission standards for the coal plants. And some of the coal plants are not able to meet that or they are operating low capacity. These are all kind of scenario, one lead to other, the multiple factor. This is a kind of scenario that is happening in China that is contributing to the price. As I said, when China sneezes, world shivers. China is a large supplier. When China is curtailing production as a corrective measure, as a structural changes, then the world production comes down, world supply is not able to meet. Because, for example, I tell you, China is the largest supplier of the chips right now. Chip production has come down. China is supplying the rare earths to the world. When China is going to not stop supplying rare earths to the world will go shivering. There are a number of other plants where China is making a big thing. They're all now cutting the production. The supply from China has curtailed significantly, mainly due to the environmental standards China is applying, the structural corrective measures that China is doing. That is also causing this kind of a price rise. This is our broad the parameters based on which the price rises happen. Now, to sum up, what is happening right now? Number one, I said the COVID-19 scenario. COVID-19 scenario has caused upsets. It has now, after the lifting of this, demand has gone up. Supply is not able to meet. It could be a corrected situation. Probably things may settle down little later, very soon it may settle down. That's our hope. Second factor is the crude oil price rise. Now, how long the crude oil production can be kept at this present level by OPEC is a matter of question, matter of doubt, matter of speculation. Because what is happening is the future of the crude oil is already facing a threat. Because electric vehicles are being introduced in a very big way all over the world right now. And renewable energy sources are being stepped up. Production by renewable is being stepped up. A lot of work is taking on developing the green hydrogen. And hydrogen production by even other routes like blue hydrogen, all are being stepped up right now. All these kind of activities, like electric vehicle, these renewable energy, stepping for production of green hydrogen, they're all direct threat to the future market for this crude oil. OPEC countries are aware of this. In case the OPEC countries are going to keep the price at very high, there is going to be a consumer resistance. People will keep looking for alternate options. When they get the alternate option, they will further lose the market. So OPEC countries cannot play this tune for a very long time. They are in a vulnerable situation. Today, they are holding the price without reducing is similar to the act of cutting the nose to spite the face. Third factor is China's scenario. When you come to China's scenario, is the China scenario as simple as China restructuring it, China applying environmental compulsions, China shifting the unit from one place to another to improve the ecological conditions? Is it as simple as that or anything more to it? So that's where here it is. Now we have discussed. Now my talk is being followed by Mr. Swaminathan. Swaminathan is the director of the consultant of Singapore. And this entire study was made under the leadership of Mr. Swaminathan. And Swaminathan he's a chemical engineer, did his MBA from International Management in Ahmedabad. He worked in several companies in Europe and Far East in senior positions, including supply chain management, market forecast, and all that. Now I hand over the mic to Mr. Swaminathan. Swaminathan will talk about the Chinese scenario, global scenario, and come out with give his recommendation. Over to Mr. Swaminathan.
Thank you, Mr. Venkatraman. I'll share a presentation that I have prepared on this subject. And Mr. Venkatraman had nicely laid out some of the issues that are at the background behind the price rise, of sharp price rise we've seen in several chemicals, commodities around the world. And it has happened this year and in the last few months, which has left many of the industries unprepared and not knowing how to deal with these prices. So I will deal with some of the issues that are going on, and we will see what is actually happening and what is actually driving these price rises that are going on in these commodities. There are two key developments that has happened this year, which are the root cause for several chain reactions of price rises that are happening around the world. One of which is the energy crisis. I've said China's energy crisis, but it's actually a global energy crisis, but driven partly from China. And we also have a shipping and logistics crisis, which is separate from the energy crisis, but that has also been extremely severe and has impacted global trade in a very severe way, and causing lack of availability of material and products around the world, also causing a lot of panic and a chain reaction in intermediate and final products and basic materials around. So let's look at each one of them in detail. To start with the China's issues, I mean, we need to understand that we all know that China is the second largest commodity in the economy in the world. And as we can see here in this chart, Chinese economy has rapidly taken off after about 2000. And it's called a commodity super cycle around the world because there has probably never been a period of about 20 years or so of sustained demand for commodities driven by a huge Chinese population and a sustained period of industrialization for 2 decades, particularly urbanization and industrial development, which has caused a huge, what we call a commodity super cycle for about 20 years. So this has continued unabated, probably not seen any other time in history without a boom and bust, but a very, very consistent demand cycle. And if you look at the position of China in consumption of commodities and materials around the world, China is both the largest producer and largest consumer of a lot of commodities, except probably oil and gas. It is the largest consumer, which basically means that whatever is happening in China with respect to demand and supply is affecting the prices around the world. And over the last 10 years, the demand growth in China has represented about 50 to 100% of the global consumption increase in most commodity markets, which basically means that more than half the growth in consumption of the commodities is coming from Chinese demand. So that's basically how much China is having an impact. And as contributing that much to the global growth, it means that it's also the price setter for most of the commodities. So if China's demand goes up or demand goes down, is basically determining the marginal price of most of the commodities around the world. So if we look at what is happening in China, so the first chart above shows the manufacturing share of GDP in China. So if you look at it, China has in the last about 5 years or so tried to improve its service economy and decrease its reliance on the manufacturing economy in order to balance the economy. The first 15 years or so was driven by export growth, which basically meant industrialization of China, but without the domestic demand being able to balance the economy. But in the last 5-6 years, they have made tremendous progress in balancing between service and manufacturing, and as a result of which, the manufacturing share of GDP has steadily come down. However, what we can see is that since 2020 to today, the manufacturing share of GDP has actually gone up again. And that is basically a reflection of the fact that since COVID, there has been a surge in manufacturing sector around the world. And this has been driven by several factors, which we will see later. And the consequence of this is that the demand for materials and production of the products which China is exporting has gone up. And so as the bottom chart we see, which is the thermal coal futures, this is the largest coal futures in price in China. And we can see that just this year, the coal price has gone up, the futures price has gone up from around 600 RMB per ton to almost about, as of last month, about 1,500, 1,600 RMB per ton. So it has been a steep and virtually doubling of the coal price is what has happened in China. It's simply because the demand has surged this year, coming from global demand for finished products and intermediate products. Because of post-COVID, the world is now again coming back to normal demand and supply. And in fact, it's probably gone up even compared to pre-COVID demand and supply. So what is happening in terms of the energy crisis in China? So the energy crisis being characterized by extreme prices of coal. see, there is a extremely tight energy supply today globally. It's not just in China, but even Europe and US are finding out for their own reasons that there is a very, very tight energy supply, which basically means that traded commodities like natural gas, which are traded across borders, are now seeing simultaneous demand from around the world and pushing up the prices, global energy prices in a synchronous way across the world. There is a sharp economic rebound from COVID lockdowns, which is what we saw in the previous chart, which is now reflected in a very high manufacturing share of GDP and actually a rebound, and what economists called a V-shaped recovery, which basically means that after a plummeting share of manufacturing in the GDP, it has now gone up and regained its own share and even probably gone beyond. And this has seen energy-intensive manufacturing industries seeing a huge surge in demand. The warm summer has also led to extreme air conditioning consumption across China. So this summer has been very warm in China, and that has led to very, very high power consumption, which has depleted the coal stocks and power plants around China. And there is also an escalating trade spat with Australia, which has depressed the coal trade. So for geopolitical reasons, China and Australia have been at loggerheads for maybe a year, 2 years now. And China has been wanting to reduce its dependence on Australian coal, but Australia is the single largest supplier of coal to China. And the quality of the Australian coal is also not to be matched in this region, the combination of quality of Australian coal and the price. So this has resulted in a reduction of coal import from Australia into China. And also the Chinese power companies, not wanting to be caught unawares, just like they were caught unawares in the summer, have been ramping up their coal purchases in order to ensure adequate winter supply. All this has resulted in a rapid depletion of stocks of coal in the power plants, and has resulted in increased coal demand and resulted in a sharply increasing coal price. So the surge in coal price have actually made it quite impossible for many of China's coal-fired power plants to turn a profit, because the power plants operate on regulated prices, whereas they have to buy coal in the spot market, which basically results in them cutting output and resulting in widespread power shortages. 2/3 of China's electricity comes from burning coal. So China is also trying to address the climate change issues. Basically, Xi Jinping has made a pledge that his country will reach peak carbon emissions within 9 years, which is 2030. As part of the long-term goal to reach carbon emissions by 2030, China has also set several short-term targets. For example, this year, China has set a target to reduce its energy intensity of GDP by 3%. Energy intensity being the value of energy that is consumed to produce $1 of GDP. So China wants to progressively reduce 3% in terms of energy intensity of GDP, which basically means that it has to simultaneously become more efficient in consumption of energy while not compromising on its growth in GDP, which is a very, very complex task that they have taken upon themselves, and as part of their commitment as well. The National Development and Reform Commission, which is NDRC, is the equivalent of their planning commission. It monitors these at a provincial level on a quarterly basis. So they have a very serious effort to address the issues around carbon emissions, and they are looking at every provincial level on a quarterly basis in order to meet their targets. So what this has meant is that while coal prices have surged with demand, and the regulated prices on power are what they are, the power producers are faced with a unique challenge. So they face with the challenge that the more power they actually produce, every ton of additional coal that they buy, they're actually making a loss. So a lot of the power producers have gone on maintenance, have gone on variety of reasons in order to not produce power in the last quarter, which has resulted in a severe reduction in availability of power across China. And even as China cracks down on these conventional fossil fuels, it does not have a credible alternate green source of energy yet. So it is still very dependent on coal as a primary source of fuel for the power. So the central government has been, in the meanwhile, criticizing the provinces for not meeting their energy targets, as they are monitoring every province, and which basically means that the local provinces who have their own decision-making power are under increasing pressure to not expand their power consumption, and yet they have to meet their economic targets. So it is a form of dual control that it's a squeeze that the Chinese central government is placing on the provinces to meet their environmental targets for both energy consumption as well as energy intensity. So it's a tremendous challenge and a tremendous internal pressure that the Chinese government is facing. As a consequence, there is a severe shortage of power in several provinces. This is as of last month. This is all the provinces in China. The provinces that are marked in green are those provinces where there is no power rationing. The provinces that are marked in yellow have some power rationing in place, and the provinces that are marked in red have severe power rationing in place starting about last quarter. What happened was, at the end of first half of this year, the NDRC issued ratings across provinces showing which were the provinces that were meeting their targets and which were not. And 9 provinces were very poor, were rated very poor on their energy usage, and were given strict targets to bring them in line by mid-September and meet their annual targets. However, these 9 provinces are very important provinces from industrial activity point of view, and they are probably account for almost half, about 45% of the industrial activity of China. So these provinces, with about half of the industrial activity of China, have local governments who have a requirement to aggressively reduce their energy consumption to meet the year-end target, which basically means that the industries in these provinces are going to be impacted. Now, the challenge that the local governments have is that they need to balance the consumption of power between industrial use and domestic use. And in the balance between industrial use and domestic use, there is also a problem of public. I mean, you got to keep the public also happy, not impacting them very badly. So it has resulted in a very, very big challenge for them in order to understand whom they want to put priority on, whether it's the public or whether it's the industrial activity. So as a consequence, there is an investment bank which had made an estimate of the kind of production cuts that Chinese industry would have faced, and in the last quarter and probably even in the next quarter, where they had classified the energy intensive sectors and tried to figure out which energy sector would be facing what kind of power cuts. We saw the red province and the yellow province, and they had estimated that the sharpest production cuts, about 20 to 40%, would be in the high energy intensive sectors, which is ferrous metals, non-ferrous metals, and non-metal mineral products. Medium levels of production cuts, which is about 10 to 20%, would be in petroleum, coking and nuclear fuel, and chemical material and product. And about 5 to 10% of production cuts in mining, textile, chemicals, chemical fiber, rubber, and plastic products. So, as you can imagine, with China being a large exporter of a lot of these products, in fact, in metals and several of the metals, China has probably 50 to 60% of global production. A 20 to 40% cut would immediately ripple through global supply chains in terms of both price as well as availability. This has led to a lot of panic in downstream, with several producers trying to stock up. And when you try to stock up, it increases demand. and further increases the price and results in a self-reinforcing situation of shortage and higher prices. So that is rippling around the global supply chain, caused by sharp and unplanned production cuts across several industries. So as of now, the power restrictions are already in place for factories that are in affected provinces, and energy shortage has affected factories and manufacturers across the country. Even high value products such as semiconductor chips, which are some of the highest value products, even they are supply challenged, and producer and suppliers of large chip makers such as Intel and Qualcomm have been told to shut down factories in Jiangsu province for several days. So high value products do not have, usually don't operate with very large inventories across the whole supply chain. And when that happens, you can suddenly have severe shortages. And that is why we see that, for example, in the automotive sector, several car companies have shut down production, and it's estimated that the loss of car production around the world could be as high as in excess of almost $50 billion. So this is a ripple effect in the entire supply chain that's caused by supply challenges that are coming out of China. This is not just in China, which is a problem. Europe has its own energy challenges. In Europe, the energy challenge is driven by liquefied natural gas. The price of liquefied natural gas has soared to almost $34 per MMBTU for delivery in December and January 2022. And the price of CO2 emission rights has increased more than 200% in 2021. Now, Europe is very heavily dependent on natural gas, and particularly natural gas supplied from Russia for domestic heating, industrial heating, and several industries, SMEs, large industries are dependent on natural gas as their source of energy supply. Germany has recently, a few years ago, abandoned nuclear, and even in investment in gas resources within Europe, they have extremely severe environmental norms, which have reduced investment in carbon-related energy sources. Renewable energies work 20% of the time, and when they do not work, the only guarantee is to use natural gas. And for that, the world still does not have extremely good storage solutions for renewable energy when they do not work. And that is also a severe challenge. And what has happened this year as well is that the last winter was a very cold winter. It was colder than normal, and that depleted natural gas inventories. And gas and electricity prices soared as demand from rebounding economies surged too fast. So they had depleted natural gas inventories combined with soaring economy, which were rebounding, which basically resulted in supplies not being able to match. Along with that, in the past, they have recently retired hundreds of coal and natural gas power plants because they are aggressively moving from carbon to renewables. And to top it as well, this year, there has been very unusually low output of wind power because the wind speeds have been very poor, and also very low rainfall in parts of Europe, which has resulted in low electricity output from the renewables as well. In addition to this, there is also a geopolitical issue which is related to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Russia has laid a new pipeline. They've completed it. It's an $11 billion pipeline under the Baltic Sea, which cuts directly from Russia to Europe and bypasses the land route across several other countries, which has been severely opposed by the United States. But Russia wants it. Russia wants it for several reasons. And under pressure from US, Europe has also not agreed to grant permission to Russia to supply with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And as a consequence, it's not very clear, but Europeans are accusing the Russians of not supplying gas as a blackmail tactic in response to a surging demand. It's not clear if that's really true because the Russians are denying it. But the net result is that there is a shortage of gas in Europe and has resulted in an extremely high gas price. And electricity producers are already asking for government support because the consumer prices are going to soar in this winter, because this winter is also expected to be very cold. So what is going to happen in this winter is yet to be seen, but Europe, as US as well, is not. I mean, he's feeling the effects of the global LNG prices, because the global LNG astronomical rise has resulted in US natural gas prices as well as spiking. As you can see in the graph, the US natural gas prices have spiked by 150% since the beginning of the year, because there is a global demand for LNG, and a substantial amount of US stock is also now filling the LNG route from US to Europe. And there is a surge in US natural gas demand as well. And 40% of electricity generated in the US with the natural gas as feedstock, as a consequence of which the power sector in the US is also feeling the effects of the price rise of feedstock. So as a consequence, what we can see is that if you look at coal as contributing to the power generation in US, coal has, of course, been steadily declining from, if you look at it in 2004, coal was about 50% of US electricity production was from coal. In the last about 1.5 years, there is an increase in 10 percentage points in US power using coal as a feedstock, because the natural gas prices have gone up so much that several producers have switched to coal because of coal being cheaper, and you see a rebound of about 10 percentage points in US electricity produced through coal. So basically, circumstances in China and European natural gas and coal markets are having an impact on US. So simultaneously, US, Europe, and China having similar energy concerns is having an issue across the world, and having an issue across the world and across all material. And no country in the world is spared these price rises, sharp rises that we are seeing. As a consequence, if you look at certain key commodities such as aluminum, copper, zinc, and iron ore is an exception, which I will explain. They've all seen about 30-40% price spike until the last quarter. And that's caused by both surge in energy prices, as well as supply chains being threatened by bottlenecks, which I will come to in the next section. I will explain what the supply chain bottlenecks are. So the combination of input high prices and shipping costs are leading to these prices, where a lot of global firms are now holding stocks, because they don't want to be caught unawares by these price rises, and they are stocking. And when they are stocking, that leads to, as we mentioned just earlier, that's leading to increase in prices again. It's feeding on itself. If you look at the iron ore price has declined considerably, because China has curbed the production of steel sharply in this year, which has cut the demand for iron ore, and that is a unique situation to iron ore, and that has cut the prices of iron ore. But that is because China has has enforced very severe cuts on steel production. Today, the Chinese steel this year has not been found in the international trade market. So the global steel producers are seeing a surge in prices, and as there's a shortage of steel globally, and however, that has resulted in a drop in iron ore prices driven by China. So let's come to the shipping and logistics issues, which is another category of issues which is also causing severe stress in global supply chains. What happened was when COVID hit us in 2020, it brought global supply chains to a halt. The first industry that was impacted was the shipping industry, because suddenly there was nothing to ship. There were no producers, no demand, and the global supply chains were brought to a halt. And shipping is an industry that operates on very thin margins. They make little money many of the years, and sometimes they make a lot of money. So they are very quick to respond. And so container carriers responded by cutting capacity severely in 2020 to respond to the halting of the global supply chains. And that has extended into 2021. So as you can see, if you look at see the cumulative sea line cancellations from last year, about March, April to about August of this year, almost about 400 sea lanes have been cancelled in the Trans-Pacific. And Trans-Pacific is the busiest shipping line in the world. Trans-Pacific and your Asia-Europe lines are the backbone, each representing about 40% of trade. Trans-Pacific is basically Asia to the United States. All the export economies of Asia, Vietnam, South Korea, Singapore, China to the American market. By 2020 second half, the virus containment measures are over in China, but and some nations, but the shipping cancellations did not stop. So as a consequence, this year there is a much better balance between demand and supply in shipping. In fact, there has been probably a too severe cut in shipping because the industries did not expect the kind of rebound in demand that has happened in 2021. In addition to this, there are other issues that happened in the shipping industry. There was the Suez issue in the first quarter, where a vessel, Ever Given, a Taiwanese vessel, was forced by strong winds and it parked in the Suez Canal and obstructed it. And that caused a very, very severe global congestion because Suez Canal is a very important gateway for trade between Asia and Europe. And about 370 ships could not pass the canal, and that caused severe congestion and upward pressure on container rates. On top of that, in ports, there were COVID outbreaks, and Ningbo and Yantian are very, very big ports in China, and they were closed because of COVID outbreak in the ports. Similar issues had happened in Vietnamese ports. And again, these caused delays and congestion globally. And even the throughput in the ports, because of COVID, has slowed down because of variety of COVID checks that have been introduced. So the entire shipping industry is now operating on a much slower productivity than what they are used to and what the global trade needs. From the demand side, if you see, like Mr. Venkatraman briefly mentioned, there has been unprecedented economic stimulus from some governments. In fact, all governments have made a variety of stimulus policies, but the kind of stimulus policies we've seen, for example, from the US has been quite unprecedented. So these stimulus have been basically direct checks to consumers. And however, because everybody is being stuck in COVID, the stimulus checks have been disproportionately spent on goods rather than services. There is not much service to spend the stimulus checks on. Restaurants have been closed, malls have been closed, all the service activities, travel has been closed, airlines were not fully functioning. So US consumers have spent a disproportionate amount of money, enormous amount of money on buying consumer goods. And that has resulted in soaring US merchandising imports. And as we can see, this is the all-time high merchandise imports. And this has resulted in a sharp surge in demand in export economies in Asia. The US e-commerce sales has soared. What was expected to be in 2025 in terms of the e-commerce demand growth was already seen in 2021. So the consequence of this surge is a global logistical gridlock. So the gridlock is caused by extremely high demand and a cut in shipping capacity, and so not enough shipping capacity to match. So as a consequence, prices have soared, and in fact, container vessels have been dropping their cargo from Asia to the United States, dropping the cargo there, and they found it economically viable simply to return to Asia empty to fill up another cargo and go back rather than waiting for a cargo, because the shipping rates have soared so much that it's still profitable to do that. And on top of this, US is now discussing another stimulus package, about a $3 trillion or $2 trillion that is up for discussion. It's in Congress. They are discussing very intensely about it. And so there is another fiscal stimulus coming, and this can only add to this surge in demand. So it is not, if the stimulus passes, next year is likely to be more of the same, because there is no way that stimulus can be introduced and not result in a surge in demand again. So if you look at the Los Angeles Long Beach port, the LALB port, which is one of the largest ports in the United States, as you can see, this chart shows the number of TEUs are 20-foot equivalent units, the 20-foot container equivalents, the number of them which are waiting. So as of September, there are about 40,000 containers or so waiting to be offloaded in the LA port, because they cannot find docking capacity, because the ports can't handle it. The ports are not able to handle the surge in trade. And this is now a situation where on both ends of the shipping line, which is the LA side as well as the Chinese side, the two poles of the trans-Pacific trade, there are bottlenecks. So the high export volumes can't be moved fast enough. The intermediate goods cannot reach processors in time, and everybody is simply fighting to get a container on any container anywhere available. So it is a big fight. And any procurement manager you talk to in any company is his main bottleneck today is not material, but it's just simply getting a container. So of course, such a severe shortage would automatically reflect in price. So the global Baltic index, which is an index which tells you a bit about the global container rates, over January to December this year, the Baltic index has increased from about $1,460 per TEU to about $3,000. In fact, in 2021, the Baltic dry index has moved up sharply by almost 4 times. In fact, although the index is about 4 times, any procurement manager in a large company who is moving goods from Asia to Europe, they say that it is almost 9 to 10 times where they are paying in terms of shipping cost. Now, this is killing for industries such as textiles or any commodity industry which operates on thin margins, where now the logistics costs are so high that it may not be worthwhile for them to export, or they may reduce capacity, or they have to find alternate markets, and so on. So it is now at a level which is extremely severe. So it's in a state what we call an endemic congestion, where vessel cancellations have led to capacity controls. Then you got COVID. Post-COVID, there was a burst in demand. Now there is imbalance in container distribution, where containers are available in certain location, but the demand is there in a certain other location, supply is somewhere else, and so on. And you have disruption in key arteries and ports. The epicenter of this is in the Pacific, but this ripples again across the whole world. And now the problem is global. So this is a very severe problem, and how long this will continue, we have to see. So in fact, when the China released its Q3 GDP figures in September, at the end of September, the Stats Bureau spokesman said that China is facing an extremely complex and severe domestic and overseas environment. Now, what they meant by that was that in domestic environment, they have the severe energy challenge, escalating cost prices, putting severe pressure on the export companies, and an overseas environment where they're not able to ship, they're not able to be productive fast enough in order to move the goods around the world. And so basically each region, as we have seen, have their own set of issues that are driving local prices, and these local prices are then spilling into the global markets. So China is an electricity demand versus supply imbalance. In the US, we saw a huge stimulus that has unleashed global supply chain bottlenecks. And in Europe, it's a reliance on renewables, which is not backed by reliable gas supplies, which has resulted in a surging energy cost in Europe. And together, these factors are driving up prices sharply across the entire value chain, the raw materials, the intermediates, and finished goods around the world. So there are several I mean, governments are involved, economists are talking. This is the talk of the whole world right now in terms of how long this is going to last. Is it a short-term phenomenon? Is it a long-term phenomenon? Are we seeing a structural change where we are going to be having to get used to a certain level of prices that we have not seen in the past? Or this is a short-term phenomenon where maybe in 6 months or up to a year, there will be a supply-demand balance where market forces will work and supply will catch up to demand and prices will drop again. Now, there are too many factors involved. It's very hard to put all those factors together to come to a very strong conclusion. And we have to wait and see what happens. I mean, because even central banks around the world are not knowing what to do, whether they should increase interest rates, drop interest rates, because they are inflation going up. So it's a challenge around the world that the world is facing. Now, achieving the message from Europe particularly is that achieving carbon net zero is going to require an extremely delicate balancing act, because, and same with China, where China is now realizing that they're dependent on coal for 2/3 of their production, and to move away from coal, even a small change that they make has ripple effects on coal demand and coal prices, and consequently on prices around the world. And that it's a very extreme delicate balancing act as the world struggles to move away from fossil fuels. Next week is the COP26 global climate meet at Glasgow. And this looks like it's going to be a theme that is going to repeatedly come up, where governments are going to say that, yes, we know that we need to decarbonize the economies, but the question is going to be how fast. Are we ready? Do we have solutions that can adequately plug the gap while we decarbonize? And can that keep the prices under control? Because at the end of the day, escalating and uncontrolled prices are going to be extremely unpopular in these countries, and which will require a decision making that that may have to slow down in the speed at which they decarbonize. Because if we are decarbonizing too fast, whether there are adequate storage solutions, whether there are adequate reliable renewables in the short run that can plug the gap if you shut down gas-based or coal-based power plants very, very quickly. So this is where we are at the moment, and so this is going to be a big challenge, and this is what I wanted to share as to how we have reached this place where we are with the prices of materials and commodities as where we are, and what has caused this from the factors that are happening around. So thank you for spending the time and listening to this webinar. We really appreciate your time. And if you have any questions or any concerns or any feedback that you would like to share, you could send us an email at nandinichemical@gmail.com. We will try to address your questions. Thank you once again, and thanks, Mr. Venkatraman, for your talk at the beginning of the webinar. And I hope this was a useful time for you. Thank you very much. Thanks once again.
முடிச்சிட்டான்